What if the most powerful weapon in history wasn't a sword, a cannon, or even an army, but a map? Not just any map, but one so coveted, so dangerous, that empires would kill to possess it, and others would vanish to protect it. Picture this, deep in the vaults of ancient libraries, hidden in the hands of shadowy figures. These weren't mere drawings of land and sea. They were blueprints for conquest, spells of domination, and sometimes silent erasers of entire peoples. This is the hidden legacy of the secret cartographers, the unsung architects of fate whose lines on parchment didn't just describe the world, they reshaped it. Think about the last time you glanced at a map on your phone. It's instant, effortless, a tool so ordinary we take it for granted. But in the ancient world, maps were anything but ordinary. They were treasures, often more valuable than gold, because whoever controlled them controlled the future. Imagine the lost atlases of Alexandria, bursting with knowledge so potent their destruction set human progress back centuries. Or the forbidden charts of the Silk Road, smuggled across deserts and mountains, whispering routes to unimaginable wealth or doom. These maps weren't just guides, they were chessboards and the cartographers. They were the players moving kings and pawns across continents. So what happened to these masterpieces of ink and parchment? Why do we only have fragments of their stories, like echoes in a labyrinth? Some were burned to keep rivals in the dark. Others were stolen, hidden, or deliberately altered to mislead. And with each vanished map, a piece of history vanished too, cultures left uncharted, trade routes forgotten, entire civilizations written out of existence. But tonight, we're piecing together the clues. We'll follow the trails these cartographers left behind, from the courts of emperors to the workshops of monks, and uncover how a single map could crown an empire or bury it forever. The journey begins now. The earliest secret maps were born in the shadows of royal courts and temple archives, where knowledge was power, and power was closely guarded. In Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization, clay tablets weren't just receipts for grain or livestock. Some held carefully etched routes to distant lands, marked with symbols only the elite could decipher. Imagine a Babylonian merchant whispering over a tablet, tracing a finger along a hidden path to a tin mine in Anatolia, a trade secret worth more than the cargo itself. Or an Egyptian pharaoh's scribe sketching the Nile's tributaries in ink, deliberately leaving blank spaces where enemy kingdoms thrived. These weren't mistakes, they were lies woven into geography, designed to mislead outsiders and magnify the ruler's domain. But the true masters of this craft, the librarians of Alexandria, in its legendary halls, cartographers didn't just copy maps, they weaponized them. Ptolemy's geographers, for instance, produced two versions of their world, one for public scrolls, riddled with errors to confuse rivals, and another, precise and glittering with strategic details, locked away for the emperor's eyes only. Even the stars weren't safe from this deception. Celestial maps used for navigation were often altered to guide enemy ships astray while ensuring friendly fleets reached their targets unscathed. And then there were the maps that never should have existed. The Zhou dynasty in China buried their territorial charts with dead generals, believing the knowledge too dangerous for the living. In Mesoamerica, the Maya painted sacred landscapes on bark paper, hiding routes to ceremonial sites beneath layers of myth, only to burn them when invaders drew near. These weren't acts of destruction, but of defiance, because sometimes the most powerful map is the one that disappears, taking its secrets to the grave. So why risk so much for scraps of parchment or clay? Because in a world without borders, the first lie about where land ended and water began could become history's truth. A single line drawn in ink might decide who lived, who traded, who ruled, and who vanished without a trace. The cartographers knew to map the world was to invent it. And in their hands, invention was the ultimate act of control. The flames that consumed the Library of Alexandria didn't just erase books, they devoured entire worlds. Among its treasures was an atlas so vast, so meticulously crafted, that its loss left explorers stumbling in the dark for generations. Picture a single hall within that great library, its shelves groaning under the weight of scrolls detailing every known coastline, every hidden oasis, every strategic pass from the Pillars of Hercules to the Indus Valley. These weren't just maps, they were living documents annotated by merchants, spies, and generals who'd walked those paths themselves. One scroll might reveal the monsoon patterns that guided Roman ships to India's ports, while another could expose the weak points in Persia's mountain defenses, knowledge worth entire kingdoms. Yet the real tragedy lies in what we'll never know. Scholars whisper of a master map, rumored to hang in the library's inner sanctum, where the Mediterranean's currents were plotted with near-modern accuracy. Some say it even hinted at lands beyond the Atlantic centuries before Leif Erikson's voyage. But was it destroyed in the fires or stolen? The surviving fragments tell a tantalizing story. A few scraps smuggled to Constantinople resurfaced in medieval Europe, their distorted copies leading navigators to dead ends and phantom islands. The famous Catalan Atlas of the 14th century, with its startlingly accurate depiction of West Africa, may have been pieced together from these remnants, like a puzzle missing half its pieces. Then there's the darker possibility that Alexandria's maps didn't perish by accident. Rival powers had every reason to silence that knowledge. The Ptolemies had used the library's cartographic secrets to dominate Mediterranean trade, choking rivals by controlling the winds and tides on parchment before they ever reached the battlefield. When Rome rose, could its generals have ordered certain scrolls burned to ensure no one else held that advantage? Or did the library's own custodians, facing invasion, torch their treasures rather than let them fall into enemy hands? The truth may lie buried in the harbor's silt, where divers still find lumps of melted wax, seals that once secured scrolls now unreadable, their inked coastlines dissolved into the sea. What if even one of those maps had survived intact? Would Columbus have sailed west with confidence instead of miscalculating Earth's size? Might Alexander's successors have pushed further into India, guided by accurate charts instead of rumor? The library's atlas was more than a collection of distances. It was a scaffold for empire, a ladder to the unknown. Its absence didn't just leave blanks on the map, it rewrote destiny. And somewhere in the echoes of those lost corridors, the ghost of a question lingers. Did we lose our past, or was it taken from us? The Silk Road's most valuable cargo wasn't silk, spices, or even gold. It was knowledge, carefully folded into maps so secretive, they were worth more than the caravans that carried them. Picture a merchant in Samarkand unfurling a scrap of parchment under flickering torchlight. To the untrained eye, it might look like a simple sketch of mountains and rivers. But hidden beneath the ink are tiny dots marking secret wells in the Taklamakan Desert, or zigzagging lines warning of ambush points near the Pamir passes. These weren't just directions, they were lifelines encrypted with symbols only trusted guilds could decode. A single misplaced line could mean the difference between a fortune and a shallow grave. Yet the real power of these maps lay in what they left out. Persian cartographers famously omitted the northern routes to China, forcing rivals to take longer, more dangerous paths through Turkic lands. Meanwhile, Byzantine traders circulated maps exaggerating the distance to India, scaring off competitors with tales of sea monsters and endless deserts. The most coveted charts weren't accurate. They were strategic illusions designed to funnel trade through specific cities where taxes lined the pockets of local rulers. In Kashgar, for instance, officials hoarded a master map of the Tarim Basin, updating it monthly with fresh intelligence from spies disguised as monks. Those who tried to bribe their way to a copy often vanished, their bodies left as warnings in the dunes. But why destroy such precious documents? Because some secrets were too dangerous to outlive their usefulness. When Mongol armies began sweeping across Central Asia, Silk Road cities burned their maps rather than let them fall into enemy hands. In Dunhuang, monks sealed thousands of scrolls, including rare star charts for navigation inside the Mogao caves, where they'd remain hidden for 1,000 years. And in Venice, Doges ordered the deliberate mutilation of Portolan maps after Marco Polo's travels, fearing rivals might replicate their lucrative spice routes. The irony, many of these lost maps survived in fragments, smuggled out by renegade scholars or preserved in the margins of religious texts. A Tibetan monastery's prayer book might contain a crumpled sketch of the Karakoram Pass, or a Nestorian Christian's Bible could hide a faded route to Antioch's hidden harbors. The legacy of these cartographic games still echoes today. Modern satellite images reveal ancient Silk Road pathways that match no surviving map, proof of how thoroughly some routes were erased from record. And when archaeologists uncovered a Sogdian trader's tomb in Uzbekistan, they found a silk scroll beneath his bones. Its ink had faded, but the ghostly lines traced a path to a long-forgotten jade mine, its location still guarded by the dead. That's the paradox of the Silk Road's maps. The ones that shaped history weren't the ones that survived, but the ones that disappeared, taking their truths and their lies into oblivion. Claudius Ptolemy's Geographia wasn't just a book. It was a vault of secrets, its pages divided between what the world was allowed to see and what only the powerful dared to know. The public version, copied and distributed across medieval Europe, was revolutionary enough, a sprawling atlas of the known world, from the British Isles to the Malay Peninsula, stitched together with coordinates and meticulous calculations. But hidden in the private libraries of emperors and popes lay another Geographia, its margins crammed with annotations and corrections, its maps redrawn to reveal what the official version obscured. Here, coastlines extended further, rivers bent in unexpected ways, and blank spaces on the public maps were filled with ominous labels. Here be garrisons, here the tribes are restless, here the currents betray. Take the case of Taprobane, what we now call Sri Lanka. On public maps, Ptolemy depicted it as a modest island, dwarfed by India. But in a surviving fragment of a forbidden edition, scribbled notes reveal the truth. Taprobane was far larger, its ports bristling with trade routes the Roman Empire coveted. Why the deception? Because knowledge of Taprobane's real size and wealth could ignite a colonial race, and Rome wasn't ready to share. Similarly, the Nile's sources were deliberately misplotted on public maps, its tributaries twisted into confusion to deter rivals from reaching the gold-rich kingdoms upstream. These weren't errors, they were cartographic smoke screens designed to mislead the many while arming the few. The fate of these secret maps reads like a thriller. After Ptolemy's death in the 2nd century, Byzantine emperors reportedly burned the master copies, fearing they'd fall into Arab hands during the rise of Islam. Yet whispers persisted. Centuries later, a Venetian spy named Fra Mauro claimed to have seen a corrected Geographia in Constantinople's crumbling archives, its pages tracing a sea route around Africa, a path Portugal's Henry the Navigator would spend decades trying to rediscover. Even Columbus allegedly carried a distorted copy of Ptolemy's work, its deliberate miscalculations convincing him Asia lay just weeks west of Europe. The tragedy, had he accessed the forbidden edition with its hints of an intervening continent, history might have unfolded very differently. But the most haunting question isn't what these maps contained, it's why they terrified those in power. When the library of Alexandria's remnants were scattered, scholars in Baghdad and Damascus painstakingly reconstructed Ptolemy's work, only to find key passages altered or missing. Was it censorship or something darker? A 9th century caliph scribe wrote of a map so explosive, it was locked in a silver chest and dropped into the Tigris. Its contents, a detailed survey of the Caspian's northern shores, a region rumored to hold the entrance to an ancient, subterranean trade network. Whoever controlled that route could dominate the Silk Road without ever crossing a mountain. Today, traces of Ptolemy's dual legacy linger. Modern satellite surveys have confirmed some of his errors were anything but, like the twisted course of the Danube, long dismissed as a miscalculation until archaeologists found evidence of a deliberate rerouting by Roman engineers. Even the distortions hold power. The famous Ptolemaic bias, stretching the Earth's landmass eastward, may have been a cryptographic trick, a way to encode true coordinates only decipherable with a key known to the elite. The man who mapped the world also mastered the art of hiding it in plain sight, and in that paradox lies the enduring lesson. Sometimes the most dangerous maps aren't the ones lost to fire or flood, but the ones we never knew existed in the first place. In 1957, a bookseller in Barcelona made a discovery that would ignite one of cartography's fiercest debates. A yellowed parchment, its edges frayed with age, depicting a landmass west of Greenland labeled Vinland. According to the map's annotations, Norse explorers had charted this coast part of North America long before Columbus set sail. The implications were staggering. If genuine, this was proof that medieval Europe knew of the New World centuries before the age of exploration. But from the moment it surfaced, the Vineland Map carried the scent of intrigue. Its ink contained traces of anatase, a modern pigment, yet its wormholes perfectly matched those in a 15th century manuscript it was bound with. Was it a miraculous survivor from the Viking Age, or a 20th century hoax designed to rewrite history? The map's defenders point to its eerie alignment with Norse sagas. Leif Erikson's voyages to Vinland, described in texts like the Saga of the Greenlanders, mention landmarks that seem to match the map's jagged coastline. Even more compelling are the subtle errors, a misspelled Icelandic word, a skewed latitude that a forger in the 1950s might not have thought to include. These flaws could be evidence of authenticity, proof that the map was copied from a lost original by a scribe who didn't fully understand the Norse sources. But skeptics counter with damning evidence. Advanced spectroscopy revealed the ink's titanium dioxide, a compound not used in medieval pigments, while the Latin inscription's grammar bore traces of modern phrasing. The most chilling theory, that the map was forged not for fame or profit, but as Cold War propaganda, a tool to bolster Western claims to the Americas amid Soviet historical revisionism. Beyond the scientific tests lies a deeper question. Why would anyone fake or hide such a map? Medieval Europe had motives to suppress Viking achievements. The Catholic Church, invested in Columbus's legacy, might have seen Norse Christianity as a rival narrative. Alternatively, the map could have been altered not to conceal Vinland's existence, but to exaggerate it. A single line extending the coast southward could justify Danish or Portuguese claims to territories they'd yet to discover. This wasn't just about geography, it was about legacy. Maps like these didn't just record borders, they invented them, granting kingdoms the right to conquer lands they'd never seen. The Vinland Map's greatest lesson isn't about its authenticity, but about the fragility of historical truth. Even if forged, it exposed a reality. For centuries, maps had been wielded as weapons. The Zeno map of the 14th century, purportedly showing Norse colonies in the North Atlantic, was likely a 16th century fabrication to support Venetian trade ambitions. The Turkish Admiral Piri Reis's famous world map, with its disputed Antarctic coastline, may have been pieced together from stolen Portuguese charts to taunt rivals. And in the Vatican's secret archives, scholars still hunt for the suppressed map of Pope Leo X, rumored to show Portuguese knowledge of Brazil decades before Cabral's accidental landing in 1500. What makes the Vinland Map so haunting is its duality. If real, it's a relic of Viking courage, a whisper from an era when explorers pushed beyond the known world. If fake, it's a mirror to our own obsessions, proof that even in the 20th century, we couldn't resist rewriting the past to suit the present. Either way, its power endures. Because in the end, every map is a story, and some stories are too tempting not to forge. The greatest maps of the 15th century weren't gathering dust in European courts, they were being burned in the courtyards of Nanjing. Admiral Zheng He's treasure fleet, a floating city of over 300 ships, didn't just carry porcelain and silks. Its most prized possessions were the Mao Kun maps, scrolls so precise they charted every monsoon current from Java to Zanzibar. These weren't crude sketches but masterpieces of hydrography, detailing anchorages, tidal patterns, and even the depths of foreign harbors with startling accuracy. When a Ming court official unrolled one for the emperor, it wasn't just a map, it was a key to the world. So why, after 7 epic voyages, did the Yongle emperor order every last chart destroyed? The answer lies in the whispers of a power struggle. Zheng He's fleet wasn't just exploring, it was projecting Chinese influence through a network of tributary ports from Malacca to Mogadishu. But back in Beijing, Confucian scholars saw these voyages as wasteful extravagance. Worse, the maps threatened their worldview literally. Traditional Chinese cartography placed the Middle Kingdom at the center of a square earth, bordered by barbarian lands. Yet Zheng He's charts showed a round, interconnected world where China was just one player among many. That revelation alone could destabilize an empire built on the myth of celestial supremacy. But there's a darker possibility. Some of the fleet's logs survived the purge, and they hint at discoveries the court couldn't stomach. One account describes a land beyond the Western Oceans, where towering stone faces gazed from jungle cliffs, a possible reference to Angkor Wat or even the Mayan ruins. Another mentions a port in East Africa where sailors traded for black ivory, a phrase that might hide the earliest evidence of Chinese contact with the trans-Saharan slave routes. If these reports reached the imperial archives, they'd expose a world far more complex and far less controllable than the isolationists wanted to admit. The irony is that fragments of Zheng He's knowledge slipped through the cracks. A single surviving copy of the Wubei Zhai, a Ming military manual, contains a star chart so accurate it matches 19th century navigation aids. Arab traders in Calicut later wrote of Chinese sailors using sea compasses that could plot longitude, a technology Europe wouldn't master for another 400 years. And in a twist worthy of a spy novel, a Portuguese smuggler's diary from 1522 describes buying a devilish map in Macau that showed the Cape of Good Hope decades before dyers rounded it. Was this a stolen relic of Zheng He's fleet? We'll never know for certain. What makes this censorship so haunting isn't just the loss of maps, it's the loss of a future. Had those charts survived, might China have colonized Australia before the Dutch? Could their knowledge of African currents have accelerated the age of exploration by generations? The Ming dynasty didn't just burn parchment, they incinerated alternate timelines, and in the ashes lies a warning: when maps become threats, the greatest casualty isn't geography, it's possibility itself. Imagine holding a map so accurate, its lines match modern satellite images but drawn 400 years before the invention of the sextant. That's the enigma of Portolan charts, the medieval navigator's holy grail. These weren't just maps, they were works of art inked on vellum with coastlines so precise they could guide a ship through the razor-thin straits of Gibraltar or around the jagged rocks of the Aegean. Yet their origins are a puzzle wrapped in a mystery. No rough drafts survive, no mention of their creation in ship logs, just sudden appearances in the 13th century like cartographic miracles. One theory points to the Arabs, whose astronomers had been charting the stars since the days of Baghdad's House of Wisdom. A surviving Arabic Portolan from 11th century Sicily shows eerie similarities: the same spiderweb of room lines radiating from compass roses, the same attention to coastal depth. But here's the twist: many Portolans include details no Arab trader would know, like hidden coves in Christian-held Crete or the shifting sandbars of Venice's lagoons. That's led scholars to suspect a shadowy collaboration, perhaps in places like Majorca, where Jewish, Muslim, and Christian mapmakers worked side by side under royal patronage. Then there's the Roman connection. A handful of Portolans show coastlines that match Ptolemy's ancient coordinates with uncanny fidelity, suggesting they might be copies of lost imperial surveys. In 2005, divers off the coast of Naples found a 1st-century bronze disc etched with what looked like room lines, a possible prototype for the Portolan signature navigation grid. But if the Romans had such advanced maps, why did their knowledge vanish for 1,000 years? Some whisper of a monastic conspiracy, with Benedictine scribes hoarding classical cartography in scriptoriums until the maritime republics of Genoa and Venice paid enough gold to resurrect them. The guilds, though, are the most tantalizing suspects. In archives in Barcelona, contracts surface between ship captains and chart makers bound by blood oaths. One 1440 agreement threatens death to any member who reveals the manner of the lines. These weren't just artisans, they were cartographic Illuminati, passing down secrets through generations. A Venetian guild's ledger from 1392 lists payments for the correction of the master chart, hinting at a single, evolving prototype updated by spies and sailors. That might explain why Portolans improved mysteriously over time, like a medieval Wikipedia, edited by anonymous hands across the Mediterranean. But the real genius of these maps wasn't just their accuracy, it was their deception. Modern imaging has revealed faint underdrawings on some Portolans, false harbors etched then erased, phantom islands inked over with sea monsters. These weren't mistakes, they were traps. A Genos chart in the Doge's palace contains a deliberate error near Sardinia, a reef misplaced just enough to wreck any ship not flying the Republic's flag. Others show rivers flowing backward or capes sheared off, likely sabotage against rival cities. The message was clear: knowledge wasn't just power, it was survival. And in an age where a map could make or break empires, some truths were worth killing for. What's lost is the human cost of this secrecy. We'll never know the names of the sailors who braved uncharted waters to sound depths with weighted ropes, or the draftsmen who translated their shouted bearings into delicate vellum. Their legacy lingers in the margins: a doodled ship here, a prayer for safe passage there, whispers of lives spent chasing horizons. The Portolans remind us that every map is a palimpsest, its lines hiding as much as they reveal. And in those gaps between ink and parchment, the past still breathes. In 1513, a Turkish admiral named Piri Reis put ink to parchment and created one of history's most baffling artifacts, a world map that shouldn't exist. At first glance, it's a typical early Renaissance chart, tracing the coasts of Europe and Africa with the rough approximations of the time. But look closer, and the impossible emerges, the outline of Antarctica, a continent that wouldn't be officially discovered for another 300 years. Not just a vague shape, either the map shows the Queen Maud Land coastline with eerie precision, its bays and ridges matching what modern seismographs reveal beneath the ice. How could a 16th century navigator, armed with nothing but a compass and the stars, chart a landmass buried under miles of glacial frost? Piri Reis himself left a clue. In the map's margins, he scribbled notes claiming it was pieced together from 20 older sources, some dating back to the time of Alexander the Great. Among these were charts from the Library of Alexandria, Portuguese spy maps, and most intriguingly, what he called the maps of the ancients. But who were these ancients? The most compelling theory points to the Minoans, the Bronze Age seafarers of Crete, whose sophisticated port cities suggest they might have ventured far beyond the Mediterranean. A clay tablet found in Akrotiri depicts a star chart aligning with southern hemisphere constellations, hinting at knowledge of latitudes no European would reach for millennia. Even more tantalizing are the oral traditions of the Maori, whose ancestral voyages speak of the frozen land beyond the great waves, a description that aligns unsettlingly with Antarctica's Ross Sea. Yet the map's survival is as mysterious as its origins. After Piri Reis fell out of favor with the Ottoman court, his work was nearly scrubbed from history. In 1553, Sultan Suleiman ordered all copies seized, fearing their geographic secrets might aid rivals. Only one version escaped destruction, hidden inside a chest in the Topkapi Palace's deepest vaults. There it lay forgotten until 1929, when a German theologian named Gustav Diesmann stumbled upon it during a cataloging project. The timing couldn't have been more ironic. Just as modern explorers were risking their lives to map Antarctica's edges, a 400-year-old document emerged showing they'd been beaten to the punch. But the real controversy lies in the details modern science can't explain. The map doesn't just show Antarctica, it shows it ice-free, with river valleys and mountain ranges that align with seismic surveys of the continent's subglacial topography. Geologists confirm Antarctica was last exposed roughly 6,000 years ago, long before any known civilization could have mapped it. This has led to wild but persistent theories about lost advanced cultures or even extraterrestrial intervention. More plausible, though, is the idea that Piri Reis had access to a chain of knowledge stretching back to the Neolithic. Cave paintings in Spain's Cantabria region depict what look like star maps of the Southern Cross, a constellation only visible from extreme southern latitudes. Could prehistoric traders have passed down celestial navigation techniques through oral traditions, later transcribed onto the charts Piri Reis inherited? What makes the Piri Reis map so unsettling isn't just its accuracy, it's the questions it leaves dangling. Why does it omit the Drake Passage, the gap between South America and Antarctica that every modern map marks? Was this a deliberate omission to guard a secret trade route, or evidence that the strait was still frozen shut when the original sources were drawn? Even the map's distortions are revealing. The Amazon River is shown twice, once as a mighty estuary, once as a thin inland trickle suggesting Piri Reis stitched together charts from different eras, each capturing the river at varying stages of its geological evolution. The map's greatest lesson might be humility. For all our satellites and sonar, we're still piecing together how much the ancients truly knew. When Charles Hapgood first studied the map in the 1960s, he famously wrote that it seems to suggest that some forgotten civilization once undertook a global survey with instruments we have yet to rediscover. Whether that's true or not, the Piri Reis map stands as a haunting reminder. History isn't just what's been recorded, it's what's been lost, waiting beneath the ice or between the lines of a fading parchment for someone brave enough to look. The Cantino planisphere didn't just cross borders, it shattered them. Crafted in Lisbon's Costa da India, where Portuguese navigators guarded their discoveries like dragon's gold, this map was a crown jewel. Its vellum surface pulsed with forbidden knowledge, the bulge of Brazil's coastline years before Cabral's accidental landing, the serpentine gold routes of West Africa traced in vermilion ink, even the whispered locations of Spice Islands beyond the Cape of Good Hope. For Duke Ercole d'Este of Ferrara, the man who commissioned the theft, this wasn't just a map, it was a skeleton key to the 16th century's greatest treasure chest. Alberto Cantino, the spy tasked with stealing it, didn't sneak into vaults or bribe guards. He posed as a horse trader, lingering in Lisbon's dockside taverns where drunken cartographers bragged about their work. One night, for the price of a few gold coins and a promise of asylum, a disgruntled Portuguese chartmaker rolled the planisphere into a hollowed-out barrel of salt cod. The risk was unimaginable. Portugal had made leaking maps punishable by death, a law enforced by the infamous Black Fleet, ships that patrolled the Atlantic to intercept spies and sink rival vessels. Yet Cantino's audacity paid off. By the time Lisbon's spies realized their loss, the map was already hanging in Ferrara's ducal palace, its secrets spilling into the courts of Italy, France, and Spain. The fallout was immediate. Spain's Ferdinand and Isabella, seeing Brazil's outline, rushed to renegotiate the Treaty of Tordesillas, shifting the papal meridian to claim more of the New World. Venetian merchants, long frozen out of Portugal's African trade, used the map's gold routes to fund clandestine expeditions to Elmina. Even the Knights of Malta, studying the planisphere's Mediterranean defenses, launched raids on Ottoman ports they'd previously avoided. This wasn't just espionage, it was cartographic warfare, with ink as the weapon and continents as the spoils. But the planisphere's true genius lies in its lies. Modern scholars have spotted deliberate distortions. The Cape of Good Hope's longitude skewed just enough to mislead French navigators, or the Indian Ocean's width exaggerated to deter competitors. The map was a honey trap, its truths laced with poison. Some suspect the Portuguese allowed its theft, knowing the errors would send rivals on suicidal voyages. One annotation near Madagascar warns of dragons that drink ships whole, likely code for monsoon patterns that wrecked unprepared fleets. Yet the map's greatest secret wasn't geographical. Hidden in the intricate compass roses are tiny cipher symbols, a code later used by the Medici banking network to coordinate loans for colonial ventures. The Cantino planisphere didn't just reveal the world, it financed its conquest, and somewhere in its faded pigments, a final mystery lingers, a phantom island labeled Antillia, placed precisely where Columbus would later claim to find Cuba. Was this proof Portugal knew of the Caribbean before 1492? The answer, like the map itself, remains tantalizingly out of reach. What's certain is that in the right hands, parchment could topple empires. And in 1502, Alberto Cantino proved that sometimes the pen or the map was mightier than the sword. In 1507, a German cartographer named Martin Waldseemüller pressed his quill into parchment and changed history with a single word: America. His massive world map, stretching over 12 square feet, was revolutionary for its time, not just for its accuracy, but for the bold baptism of two continents no European monarch had fully grasped. The name honored Amerigo Vespucci, the Florentine navigator whose letters described the New World not as Asia's edge, as Columbus insisted, but as a landmass entirely unknown to antiquity. But this wasn't just geography, it was politics. By etching Vespucci's name across the southern continent, Waldseemüller wasn't merely giving credit, he was picking sides in a high-stakes game of imperial branding. The map's survival reads like a thriller. Of the 1,000 copies believed printed, only one survived, tucked away in a German monastery's library for centuries. Even more curious, the name America vanished from Waldseemüller's later maps, replaced by vague terms like terra incognita. Some blame pressure from Spain, furious that Vespucci, a mere merchant sailing for Portugal, had stolen Columbus's glory. Others point to the church, uneasy with the idea that sacred scripture had missed 2 whole continents. But the most compelling clue lies in the map's own annotations. Waldseemüller wrote that he'd based the name on Vespucci's discovery, yet Vespucci himself never claimed to have found a new world, only new lands. Was this a cartographic misunderstanding that stuck, or a deliberate exaggeration to sell more copies? The irony is that the map's greatest deception wasn't its labeling, but its accuracy. Waldseemüller depicted the Pacific Ocean a full decade before Balboa discovered it, and sketched South America's coastline with precision that baffles historians. Some believe he accessed stolen Portuguese charts, their contents guarded under penalty of death. Others argue he pieced together rumors from Basque whalers who'd likely reached Newfoundland by the 1480s. But the most tantalizing theory involves a lost letter from Vespucci describing a secret voyage where he'd sailed far south of Brazil, glimpsing a continent no European had mapped. If true, it would mean America was named not for the man who found it first, but for the one who admitted it existed. What makes the Waldseemüller map so explosive isn't just what it shows, it's what it hides. Buried in the ornate border is a tiny ship sailing west from Africa, its course aligning perfectly with the currents that would later carry enslaved Africans to the Americas. Coincidence or a chilling prophecy of the consequences this new world would unleash? And then there's the landmass labeled Terra Ulterior, an Antarctica-like shape at the bottom of the globe, centuries before its official discovery. Like so much of this map, it feels less like a guess and more like a secret someone wanted told, but not too loudly. The map's legacy is a paradox. It gave a name to continents, yet nearly vanished itself. It celebrated exploration, yet may have been built on espionage. Most haunting of all, it reminds us that history belongs not to those who make discoveries, but to those who control the maps. Because long after Vespucci's ships rotted and Columbus's claims faded, it was Waldseemüller's parchment that decided what we'd call half the world. And in that act of naming lay the ultimate power, the power to invent reality itself. Behind the Vatican's bronze doors lies a vault where geography and faith collide, the Archivum Secretum, home to maps that defy history. One document in particular has haunted scholars for centuries, the suppressed map of Pope Alexander VI, drawn in 1493 to divide the New World between Spain and Portugal. But hidden beneath its official borders are faint pencil marks tracing coastlines that match no known European voyage of the time. Some believe these ghostly lines reveal Portuguese knowledge of North America decades before Cabot, or even Norse settlements the Church chose to ignore. Why erase such discoveries? Because in an age where papal decrees granted kingdoms, admitting others had reached the Americas first would have unraveled Spain's divine right to conquer. The Vatican's most guarded cartographic treasure isn't parchment, it's a copper globe from 1506, its surface etched with an island labeled High Brassel west of Ireland. Medieval legends described this as a phantom island cloaked in mist, but the globe's coordinates align eerily with underwater volcanic ridges near the Azores. Even stranger, a notation in Latin warns hic sunt dracones, here be dragons, a phrase typically reserved for uncharted territories. Was this a coded reference to volcanic activity, or evidence the Church knew of lands it dared not acknowledge. Jesuit missionaries in China later wrote of similar globes in the Vatican's possession, one showing a land bridge between Asia and America that contradicted biblical flood narratives. These weren't just maps, they were theological time bombs. Access to these documents has sparked diplomatic incidents. In 1789, a French revolutionary agent named Armand de Gontaud breached the archives, later boasting of seeing a map of the Antipodes dated to the 12th century, 500 years before Captain Cook. The Vatican swiftly declared the map a forgery, but de Gontaud's sketches resurfaced in 1921, bearing annotations in Templar cipher. More recently, in 2004, researchers using spectral imaging on a 14th century Mappa Mundi found overwritten text describing a western land of red-skinned peoples. The original ink dated to the 1300s, decades before Columbus. Church officials dismissed it as a monk's fantasy, but the imaging team noted something chilling. The description matched the Beothuk people of Newfoundland, a tribe Europeans wouldn't encounter until the 1600s. The Vatican's cartographic secrecy isn't just about hiding knowledge, it's about controlling time itself. A recently leaked inventory mentions the Atlas of the Chronographers, a collection of maps showing biblical sites like Eden and Sodom plotted against modern landscapes. One page allegedly places the Garden of Eden in Mesopotamia, but with river courses that match satellite surveys of long-dried Paleolithic waterways. If verified, it would mean Renaissance scholars had geographic knowledge rivaling modern archaeology. Yet these maps remain locked away, perhaps because they challenge not just history, but scripture. After all, how do you preach certainty when your own archives whisper contradictions? The greatest clue to these mysteries might lie in what's missing. In 1521, a German monk named Johann Froschauer wrote of seeing a golden map in Rome that depicted Atlantis as a circular continent beyond the Pillars of Hercules. By the time he returned with a bishop's permission to study it, the map had vanished along with the librarian who'd shown it to him. 5 centuries later, we're left with fragments and rumors, a puzzle where every piece reshapes the past. The Vatican's maps remind us that some truths aren't lost, they're waiting. The Dutch East India Company didn't just trade spices, they traded in secrets, and their most valuable currency wasn't silver or nutmeg, but ink on parchment. By the 1600s, the VOC had established a cartographic monopoly so ruthless, their maps were considered state secrets, locked in iron chests aboard company ships. Each chart was a masterpiece of deception. Coastlines subtly shifted, harbors misplaced just enough to strand rival vessels on sandbars, and phantom islands inked into empty stretches of ocean to waste competitors' time and resources. One notorious example is the Whale Island myth, a bogus landmass near Madagascar that appeared on VOC charts for nearly 80 years, luring countless French and English ships into futile searches while Dutch merchants monopolized the real trade routes. But the company's true innovation wasn't just lying, it was institutionalizing the lie. VOC cartographers worked in a sealed chamber in Amsterdam called the Karten Makkerschema, where they compiled intelligence from thousands of ship logs into a single, ever-evolving master map. Only 3 copies existed at any time, each updated quarterly with fresh distortions. Sailors caught smuggling sketches faced execution, their bodies displayed in gibbet cages at Java's ports as warnings. Even more chilling, the VOC spies infiltrated rival trading posts, stealing maps only to return them with deliberate errors. A Portuguese chart of the Moluccas, for instance, was secretly altered to show cloves growing on the wrong islands, sending competitors on wild goose chases while the Dutch harvested the real crop undisturbed. The irony is that the VOC's own obsession with secrecy may have doomed its archives. When the company collapsed in 1799, its directors ordered the burning of all sensitive maps to prevent them from falling into British hands. But a handful survived, hidden by disgruntled clerks or stashed in private collections. One such salvage, the Secret Atlas of Batavia, resurfaced in a Copenhagen auction house in 1824, its pages revealing something astonishing. The Dutch had mapped Australia's northern coastline a century before Captain Cook, complete with annotations about freshwater sources and native trade networks. Yet these discoveries were scrubbed from public charts, likely to keep British ambitions in check. What makes the VOC's cartographic reign so unnerving isn't just the scale of their deception, it's how long it worked. Their false maps influenced navigation well into the 19th century, with errors so persistent they're still etched into modern atlases. The VOC bias, a systematic skewing of Southeast Asian coastlines, wasn't fully corrected until satellite imagery proved the distortions weren't accidents but sabotage. Even today, fishermen off Sumatra swear by centuries-old Dutch depth markings that lead to hidden coral reefs, not because they're accurate, but because the VOC wanted rivals to wreck there. The company's legacy is a paradox. The very maps that built their empire also sowed the seeds of its downfall. By hoarding knowledge, they stifled innovation, leaving them blind to shifts in global trade. And in the end, their greatest weapon, the lie on parchment, became their epitaph, because when truth is treated as contraband, even the mightiest monopoly is just one honest map away from ruin. The Spanish priests who tossed Maya codices into bonfires saw more than parchment in the flames. They saw a threat to their very mission. Among the crackling pages weren't just maps of cities and trade routes, but living documents that wove together geography, astronomy, and theology into a single sacred language. Take the Madrid Codex, one of only 4 surviving Maya books. At first glance, its painted glyphs resemble a simple star chart, but decode its layers and it reveals something extraordinary, a map of the cosmos aligned with earthly temples, their positions mirroring constellations on specific dates to create a celestial calendar. These weren't just directions for travelers, they were blueprints for communing with the gods. Why did conquistadors fear these maps enough to burn them by the thousands? Because they understood their power. When Cortés arrived in 1519, Maya scribes were still updating territorial maps that had been perfected over 6 centuries, tracking the rise and fall of dynasties with the precision of modern census data. One account from a surviving codex describes a map that breathes, showing shifting alliances between city-states like Tikal and Calakmul as living networks, pulsing with tribute routes and sacred pathways. To the Spanish, such knowledge was dynamite. It proved the Maya had a sophisticated grasp of political geography that rivaled Europe's. Worse, their astrological maps predicted events like solar eclipses with terrifying accuracy, undermining the Church's claim to divine authority. The few maps that escaped destruction hint at what was lost. The Dresden Codex contains a folded page that unfolds into a serpentine map of the underworld, its rivers and caves corresponding to real cenotes in the Yucatan. Modern divers have found offerings in these sinkholes exactly where the codex marks them, proof that these were navigational guides for both body and soul. Even more chilling are the whispers of a blood map, mentioned in a Spanish friar's diary but never found. According to his terrified scribbles, it showed sacrificial sites across Mesoamerica connected by invisible lines of energy, a grid the Maya believed sustained the universe. Burn it, the friar insisted, or risk letting pagan power survive. The erasure left wounds that still bleed today. When archaeologists rediscovered the sprawling Maya city of El Mirador in the 1920s, they stumbled through the jungle for weeks. unaware that a 16th century map in a Madrid archive, copied from a now-lost original, had marked its location all along. Similarly, modern scholars struggle to explain how Maya maps placed Venus's cycles within minutes of NASA calculations, or why fragments of a coastal chart found in a Guatemalan cave perfectly account for sea level rise over 800 years. Each surviving scrap is a taunt, a glimpse of a worldview that saw no divide between science and spirit. Perhaps the greatest tragedy isn't just the loss of knowledge, but the silencing of a different way to see the world. The Maya didn't separate the earthly from the divine. Their maps were prayers, their star charts petitions. Where European cartographers drew borders, Maya scribes painted relationships between kings and constellations, between jaguar paths and monsoon winds. In the ashes of those bonfires, we didn't just lose maps, we lost an entire language of belonging, one that might have taught us how to map not just land, but meaning itself. The ocean has always been a canvas for human imagination, but some of the most persistent brushstrokes were pure fiction. Phantom islands, those elusive specks of land that appeared on maps for centuries before vanishing like mist, weren't just cartographic errors. They were weapons, bargaining chips, and sometimes desperate prayers. Take High Brassel, the most famous of them all. This circular island, said to appear off Ireland's coast once every 7 years wrapped in fog, first surfaced on a Venetian map in 1325. By the 1400s, Portuguese sailors were launching expeditions to find it, lured by legends of gold-paved cities and immortal monks. But here's the twist. Records from the Lisbon archives reveal that Prince Henry, the navigator's own cartographers, knew High Brassel didn't exist. They kept it on their charts anyway, using it as a decoy to distract Spanish ships from real Portuguese discoveries further south. Not all phantom islands were born from deception, though. Some emerged from the fog of imperfect observation. Sailors in the age of exploration often misidentified icebergs, mirages, or even dense patches of seaweed as land. The infamous Sandy Island, which appeared on British Admiralty charts near New Caledonia until 2012, likely originated from a whaler's mislogged sighting of pumice rafts, volcanic rock floating en masse. These honest mistakes became entrenched when later mapmakers, unwilling to contradict their predecessors, copied the errors like a game of telephone across generations. Then there were the Phantom Islands that served as political placeholders. In 1712, a French mapmaker named Guillaume de Lisle included Isle de la Passion, east of Brazil, a landmass he admitted he'd never seen, but insisted must exist to balance the globe's geography. Conveniently, this theoretical island fell squarely within the territory granted to France by the Treaty of Tordesillas. When Spanish navigators failed to find it, de Lisle accused them of hiding its location. The ruse worked. France used the Phantom Island to justify further expeditions, buying time to solidify claims on real Caribbean colonies. The most chilling Phantom Islands, however, were the ones designed as traps. Dutch East India Company charts in the 1600s often included Vogelzang, a fictional atoll in the Indian Ocean marked with notes about freshwater springs and friendly natives. The catch, its coordinates placed it directly in the path of deadly monsoon currents. Company logs later revealed this was intentional, a way to wreck rival ships while Dutch vessels took safer, secret routes. Similarly, British maps of the Pacific in the 1700s peppered the ocean with false reefs, ensuring only Royal Navy captains with corrected charts could navigate certain waters unscathed. Why did these cartographic ghosts linger so long? Partly because erasing them required admitting fault, something empires loathed to do, but also because, in an age when maps were as much about aspiration as accuracy, Phantom Islands fulfilled a deeper need. They were blank spaces where dreams of utopia or nightmares of monsters could reside, where explorers could project their hopes or fears onto the unknown. Even today, when satellites have mapped every centimeter of our planet, the legacy of these lost lands endures. Modern geographers still debate whether removing all fiction from maps strips them of their storytelling power, the very quality that made them instruments of wonder and of war. The next time you glance at a map, remember, the lies it tells might be more revealing than the truths. Deep beneath Topkapi Palace, where the sultans of the Ottoman Empire plotted their conquests, a clandestine guild of cartographers worked in candlelit secrecy. Known as the Haratasila, these mapmakers weren't just draftsmen, they were strategists, their pens as lethal as any janissary's sword. Their charts, drawn on gazelle skin so thin it was nearly translucent, contained details no outsider could access: the seasonal depth of the Danube's fords, the weak points in Vienna's walls, even the grazing routes of Mongol horsemen in the Caucasus. One misstep, one whispered secret, and the penalty wasn't just death, it was erasure. After the siege of Rhodes in 1522, Sultan Suleiman ordered every surviving map burned, ensuring no rival could replicate the techniques that had breached the island's legendary defenses. What set Ottoman maps apart was their ruthless precision. While European Portolan still relied on sailors' estimates, the Haratasila employed a tool called the Rubu Totosi, a quadrant so accurate it could calculate distances within a bowshot's margin. Surviving fragments from the Belgrade campaign show contour lines marking elevation, a technique modern militaries wouldn't adopt for another 300 years. But the real genius lay in their deception. A captured Venetian spy's diary from 1541 describes a devil's trick. Ottoman maps of the Mediterranean deliberately exaggerated the distance between Crete and Cyprus, luring enemy fleets into overextending their supply lines. The guild's most closely guarded secrets weren't terrestrial at all. In the vaults of the Imperial Observatory, astronomers like Taqi al-Din produced celestial maps so precise they could predict lunar eclipses to the hour. These weren't just scientific marvels, they were psychological weapons. Before the Battle of Lepanto, Ottoman admirals consulted star charts to time their attack with the new moon, banking on the darkness to mask their numbers. When the winds shifted unexpectedly, survivors claimed the maps had been cursed by a Christian witch, but the truth was far simpler. The Haratasila had underestimated the Meltemi winds, a rare miscalculation in their otherwise flawless record. Yet for all their sophistication, Ottoman maps carried silent omissions. The Kitab Letter 131 Barii, Piri Reis's legendary sailing manual, meticulously detailed every cove from Alexandria to Algiers, but conspicuously left blank the approaches to the Black Sea, where the empire's slave markets thrived. Similarly, maps of Mecca and Medina deliberately distorted street grids, a safeguard against potential invaders. This wasn't just secrecy, it was a form of cartographic jihad, protecting holy sites through strategic misinformation. The guild's downfall came from an unexpected source: paper. As European mills flooded the market with cheap parchment, the Ottomans clung to their prized gazelle skins, refusing to risk ink bleeding on inferior materials. By the 1700s, their maps had become relics, beautiful but outdated. The final insult came in 1798, when Napoleon's engineers captured a Haratasila workshop in Cairo and found maps of the Nile Delta so accurate they shamed France's own surveys. Yet the French didn't destroy them. They copied every line, proving that even in defeat, the Ottomans' greatest weapon, their knowledge, could still reshape the world. The British East India Company's map room in London wasn't filled with dusty atlases, it was an arsenal. Every parchment stacked on those oak shelves represented a stolen secret, a silent coup against rival empires. Unlike the Dutch, who guarded their charts with naval might, the British perfected the art of cartographic infiltration. Their most audacious heist, the Great Bengal Theft of 1764. Disguised as a trade delegation, company agents spent months buttering up the Nawab of Bengal's court astronomers, slowly gaining access to the Royal Library's celestial maps. Then, on a moonless night, they swapped the originals for near-perfect forgeries, smuggling the real charts out in hollowed-out prayer drums. The stolen maps didn't just show star paths, they revealed monsoon patterns critical for timing military campaigns, giving the British an unbeatable edge in their conquest of India. But espionage was only half the game. The company's surveyors, like the infamous James Rennell, didn't just map territory, they weaponized geography itself. Rennell's field maps of the Ganges Basin, drawn in the 1770s, looked like innocent hydrological surveys, but hidden in their contour lines were notations marking the best spots to ambush Maratha cavalry or flood rice fields to starve rebellious villages. These weren't tools for navigation, they were blueprints for domination. When the Mughal Emperor Shah Alam Roman II demanded their return, the company simply sent him prettied-up versions with key details, erased a cartographic sleight of hand that kept him dependent on British guidance. The real masters of deception, though, were the anonymous native draftsmen the company employed. These men, often high-caste Hindus forbidden from crossing oceans, were secretly schooled in European triangulation techniques. Their work was a double-edged sword. While they produced stunningly accurate maps of the Himalayas for British generals, they also slipped deliberate errors into surveys of sacred rivers. A single shifted bend in the Yamuna on company maps could divert pilgrim traffic, and thus trade toward British-controlled Ghats. This geographical gaslighting reshaped spiritual and economic landscapes alike. Diplomatic fireworks erupted when rival powers caught on. In 1789, a French spy in Madras intercepted a letter revealing the British had bribed a Portuguese clerk in Goa for charts of the Malabar coast. The ensuing scandal, known as the Map Affair, nearly triggered a European war, but the company's boldest move came in China, where they smuggled tea seedlings out of Fujian province using maps stolen from a king imperial botanist, maps that later enabled tea plantations in Darjeeling, breaking China's global monopoly. What made these acts so devastating wasn't just the theft, but the rewriting of reality. British cartographers didn't just copy Asian maps, they corrected them, erasing indigenous place names in favor of colonial labels. A Persian port city like Bandar Abbas became Gumbrun on company charts. The holy city of Prayagraj was rebranded Allahabad. With each alteration, history itself was colonized. Even today, modern Indian and Pakistani maps bear scars from this epistemic violence, place names that whisper of empire's long shadow, the ultimate irony. The company's own archives became victims of their paranoia. Fearing Russian spies in the 1840s, governors ordered thousands of maps burned, leaving historians to piece together their schemes from charred fragments and smuggled duplicates. In the end, the British East India Company proved a universal truth. When knowledge is power, even the mapmakers must sometimes be unmapped. The lost maps of Timbuktu. The African city of Timbuktu was once a hub of scholarship, home to thousands of manuscripts including rare maps. Many were lost during invasions or hidden to protect them from destruction. These maps challenged European notions of Africa as a blank slate, revealing sophisticated trade networks and kingdoms. What might these lost cartographic treasures have taught us about pre-colonial Africa? The recovery of Timbuktu's maps is an ongoing quest to reclaim erased histories. When European explorers first arrived in Timbuktu in the early 19th century, they expected to find a dusty outpost on the edge of civilization. Instead, they stumbled upon a city of scholars, its libraries brimming with manuscripts that defied every assumption about Africa's past. Among these treasures were maps, not the crude sketches Europeans had imagined, but intricate works of geography, astronomy, and commerce. One such map, the Tariq al-Sudan, depicted the Niger River's true course, debunking centuries of European myths about the river's supposed eastward flow. Another, the Kitab al-Mazalik wal-Mamalik, charted trade routes stretching from the Mediterranean to the gold fields of West Africa, proving the continent had been crisscrossed by thriving networks long before colonial powers carved it up. Yet these maps were more than just navigational tools. They were living records of empires. The Wangara Chronicle, a now fragmentary manuscript, contained a fold-out map showing the extent of the Mali Empire at its height, with annotations detailing tribute routes and seasonal markets. European cartographers of the same era still drew Africa as a shapeless mass labeled terra incognita, but Timbuktu's scholars had mapped the Sahel with precision, marking cities like Gao and Chenghe as bustling hubs of learning and trade. The contrast couldn't have been starker. While Europe's maps were filled with sea monsters and blank spaces, Timbuktu's cartographers had created a mirror of the known world, reflecting a reality colonizers would later try to erase. The greatest tragedy lies in how many of these maps were lost. In 1591, Moroccan invaders ransacked Timbuktu's libraries, burning some manuscripts and carrying others off to Marrakesh. Centuries later, French colonial administrators looted hundreds more, shipping them to Paris as curiosities, but the people of Timbuktu refused to let their history vanish. Families hid manuscripts in trunks buried beneath their homes or sewed them into the linings of camel saddles. In the 1970s, when drought threatened to expose these caches, librarians risked their lives smuggling them to safety, sometimes strapping bundles of parchment to their backs and trekking across the desert under cover of night. Today, the recovery of these maps is rewriting history. A fragment discovered in 2012, tucked inside a Quran in a private collection, revealed a detailed plan of the Great Mosque of Chenghe, complete with notes on its alignment with the stars. Another, painstakingly restored from water damage, shows the salt caravans of the Sahara as arteries of a vast economic system, challenging the myth that Africa's wealth began with colonialism. Each rediscovered map is a puzzle piece, slowly reconstructing a narrative that was nearly lost forever. But the work is far from over. Scholars estimate that fewer than half of Timbuktu's manuscripts have been recovered, and many remain in danger, hidden in attics, crumbling in unmarked graves, or sold illicitly to collectors. The quest to find them isn't just about geography, it's about justice, because every time one of these maps resurfaces, it does more than fill a gap in our atlases. It restores a voice to a history that was silenced, and reminds us that the world was being mapped long before Europe decided to claim the privilege. The concept of a Rosetta Stone of cartography isn't just poetic, it's a tantalizing possibility buried in the fragments of lost atlases and faded parchment. Consider the Piri Reis map's cryptic annotations, where Ottoman Turkish blends with untranslatable symbols that some linguists believe could be remnants of a Minoan sailing lexicon. Or the mysterious Vinland Map, whose Latin text contains Norse loanwords arranged in syntax that mirrors lost Greenlandic dialects. These aren't just historical oddities, they're potential cipher keys to languages that vanished when the cultures who spoke them were erased by conquest or time. Take the case of the Betis maps, medieval Spanish copies of Roman world charts peppered with place names in a script resembling ancient Tartessian, a language from pre-Roman Iberia that remains undeciphered. When researchers overlay these maps with satellite images, they find correlations between the labeled sites and ruins that match Tartessian artifact distributions. Suddenly, what seemed like fanciful illustrations become potential Rosetta Stones, linking geographic features to a lost vocabulary. Even errors hold clues. A misspelled city name might reveal how the word was pronounced by scribes who'd only heard it spoken. The real treasure hunt lies in maps that may still await discovery. In 2018, multispectral imaging revealed faint markings beneath the text of a Babylonian clay tablet, a network of lines that, when reconstructed, formed a map of the Euphrates trade routes with annotations in a previously unknown merchant code. Similar hopes surround the legendary Atlas of the Four Corners, described in a 9th century Arabic manuscript as containing the tongues of all nations alongside their territorial boundaries. If found, it could illuminate how languages spread along Silk Road pathways we've only begun to trace. But the most revolutionary prospect isn't translating known languages, it's uncovering connections between seemingly unrelated cultures. The controversial Buach map, an 18th century French artifact allegedly based on Phoenician sources, shows Antarctica with river valleys that align with geological surveys. But what stumps scholars are the names, Wrath and Kochab, words that echo Celtic and Hebrew terms for wheel and star. Could this suggest ancient contact between disparate seafaring peoples, preserved not in pot shards or bones, but in shared cartographic language? The search for cartography's Rosetta Stone is more than academic. It's a race against entropy. Every time a waterlogged Portolan chart disintegrates in a Venetian archive, or a looted Maya codex crumbles in a collector's vault, we lose not just geography, but the voices of those who drew it. Yet sometimes fate intervenes. In 2019, a conservator at Oxford's Bodleian Library noticed odd smudges on the edges of a 15th century Ethiopian world map. Under ultraviolet light, the stains resolved into lines of Jez script, a palimpsest recording the names of Swahili coastal towns in a dialect thought to have died out 2 centuries earlier. The map had been sitting in plain sight for 500 years, its linguistic secrets hiding in the margins. This is the enduring power of maps. They don't just show us where we've been. They tell us who we were in languages we're still learning to hear, and somewhere in an uncharted archive or buried ruin, there may lie a cartographic key, one that doesn't simply translate words, but rewrites the chorus of human history itself. The ink on a map may fade with time, but the wars it starts can burn for generations. Few weapons are as quietly devastating as a deliberately misplaced border or an invented territorial claim etched onto parchment. Take the case of the scramble for Africa in the late 19th century, when European powers carved up the continent using maps drawn thousands of miles away in Berlin salons, maps that ignored ethnic boundaries, sacred lands, and even basic geography. Rivers were straightened, mountains erased, and entire kingdoms reduced to blank spaces labeled unclaimed. The result, arbitrary borders that pitted rival groups against each other, fueling conflicts that still rage today. One colonial map from 1884 split the Maasai people's grazing lands cleanly down the middle, a single stroke of a pen sparking generations of disputes over water rights and pasture access. But the most brazen cartographic provocations were those designed to manufacture excuses for invasion. In 1735, British surveyors in North America deliberately shifted the border between Georgia and Spanish Florida on their official maps, pushing it 60 miles south overnight. When Spain protested, the British pointed to their own forged charts as proof of encroachment, a fabricated crisis that escalated into the War of Jenkins' Ear. Centuries later, Japan used similarly doctored maps to justify its invasion of Manchuria in 1931. altering the position of a railway on official documents to stage a Chinese attack that never happened. The lesson was clear: when facts are written in ink, truth becomes flexible and bloodshed inevitable. Even today, the ghosts of these manipulations linger. The South China Sea disputes hinge on conflicting interpretations of ancient maritime maps, with China citing Ming Dynasty charts to claim reefs thousands of miles from its coastline. In the Balkans, 19th century Austrian maps that labeled certain villages as historically Serbian or historically Croatian were exhumed during the Yugoslav wars, becoming propaganda tools to justify ethnic cleansing. The most chilling modern example might be Russia's annexation of Crimea in 2014, backed by hastily redrawn maps that suddenly proved the peninsula had always been Russian, never mind that Soviet atlases from the 1950s clearly marked it as Ukrainian. What makes these cartographic deceptions so effective is their veneer of objectivity. A sword is undeniably a weapon. A map masquerades as truth. When the British East India Company wanted to seize the Sindh region in 1843, they didn't send armies first, they sent surveyors. By publishing maps that showed Sindh's borders creeping into company territory, they manufactured a pretext for war. The tactic was so successful that one British officer boasted, "We have won the war before a single shot was fired," on paper. Yet the darkest irony lies in the maps that vanished. After the partition of India in 1947, British officials destroyed hundreds of local land records, leaving villagers to fight over boundaries they could no longer prove. In Palestine, Ottoman tax maps from the 1800s were lost during the British Mandate, erasing centuries of Arab land ownership overnight. These weren't just acts of negligence, they were calculated acts of cartographic violence, ensuring that when the guns fell silent, the maps would continue the war by other means. The next time you glance at a map, ask yourself, whose story does it tell? And more importantly, whose story has it erased? Because every line, every border, every name is a choice. And sometimes that choice is the first shot in a war no one remembers starting. The greatest irony of the digital age might be this: we've mapped every inch of our planet with satellites, yet we're losing more cartographic knowledge than ever before. Unlike the burning of Alexandria or the shredding of Ottoman gazelle skins, today's maps aren't vanishing in flames, they're dissolving into the void of corrupted hard drives, abandoned URLs, and proprietary formats that no future software will ever read. Imagine a historian in the year 2100 trying to access a 2024 traffic map stored on a defunct Google server, only to find the data locked behind obsolete encryption or simply gone. The digital dark ages won't come with a bang, but with a 404 error message. Consider the fragility of our modern tools. In 2017, when Apple abruptly discontinued its flyover 3D maps, entire cities worth of meticulously modeled architecture, some never photographed before demolition, became inaccessible overnight. Military-grade GPS maps from the 1990s, once stored on floppy disks, are now unreadable relics because the specialized plotters that decoded them were scrapped decades ago. Even open-source projects aren't safe. The crowd-sourced OpenStreetMap relies on volunteer servers that could vanish with a single donor's bankruptcy. We're repeating the mistakes of medieval monks who failed to copy crumbling parchment. Only now the rot isn't physical, it's algorithmic. The stakes are higher than misplaced landmarks. Climate scientists recently panicked when they realized early NAS, a satellite imagery of Arctic ice melt critical for tracking global warming, had been stored in a proprietary format from the 1970s. Only a frantic hunt for vintage tape readers saved the data from permanent loss. Similarly, indigenous communities in the Amazon fighting deforestation rely on digital maps of ancestral lands stored on vulnerable cloud platforms. If those vanish, so does their legal proof of ownership. This isn't just about losing directions, it's about losing evidence, memory, and justice. What makes this crisis unique is its scale. Ancient libraries held thousands of scrolls. Today, the Library of Congress estimates that 3.8 million terabytes of data, including countless maps, are generated daily. 90% will be inaccessible within 20 years. The British Geological Survey recently admitted it can no longer open early digital soil maps from the 1980s, leaving modern engineers guessing at underground conditions. Meanwhile, entire subcultures of cartography, like the early internet's whimsical, hand-drawn GPS maps or the clandestine maps of urban explorers documenting forgotten tunnels, are fading as platforms like GeoCities and Flickr purge old accounts. Yet hope glimmers in unexpected places. Archivists at Stanford are etching high-resolution maps onto nickel plates designed to last 1,000 years, while Norway's Arctic World Archive stores digital cartography on photosensitive film buried deep in a frozen mountain. Open-source initiatives like the Digital Preservation Coalition fight format obsolescence by emulating vintage software in virtual environments, allowing future generations to boot up old files like a cartographic time machine. Even blockchain technology shows promise, with projects like the Ethereum-based Living Map creating permanent, decentralized records of geographic changes. The lesson from history is clear. Maps don't just describe the world, they preserve our relationship to it. When a Babylonian clay tablet survives 4,000 years but a 21st century traffic map vanishes in a decade, we're not just losing data. We're failing those who will need these digital artifacts to understand how we saw our world, flaws, blind spots, and all. The real test of our age won't be how much we map, but how carefully we choose what to save. Because unlike parchment or stone, digital memory has no natural half-life, only the one we recklessly assign it. The power to erase a mountain or invent an island with a stroke of ink has always carried moral weight. In the 13th century, Persian geographer Zakaria al-Qazwini grappled with this responsibility when mapping the Indian Ocean. He knew the precise location of Socotra's cinnamon groves, information worth a sultan's ransom, but chose to shift the island 50 miles west on his charts. His justification, scribbled in the margins, still echoes today. Better a lie that protects the weak than a truth that empowers the cruel. This ancient dilemma, whether maps serve truth or survival, has shaped empires and haunted cartographers' consciences for millennia. Modern debates often frame map-making ethics as a binary, accuracy versus deception, but history reveals grayer terrain. During World War II, British cartographers famously doctored Ordnance Survey maps of southeast England, adding fictitious villages and altering road networks to mislead German bombers. Was this wartime necessity or a slippery slope? Compare that to the Soviet Union's systematic distortion of city plans for decades, where entire neighborhoods vanished from public maps to conceal military sites, even as citizens relied on those same charts for daily navigation. One saved lives, the other eroded trust in institutions. The difference lies not in the act of deception, but in whose interests it serves. The darkest ethical fault lines emerge when maps become tools of erasure. Australian colonial surveys from the 1800s labelled Aboriginal sacred sites as wasteland, legally voiding indigenous ownership under terra nullius doctrines. In 2018, when Google Maps erased Palestinian villages from navigation data following political pressure, it wasn't just a technical glitch, it was the digital resurrection of a colonial playbook. These aren't innocent omissions, they're cartographic violence, rewriting reality to fit dominant narratives. Yet some of history's most virtuous lies were drawn to protect the vulnerable. Medieval Jewish Mappi Mundi often omitted pilgrimage routes during plague years, slowing the spread of both disease and pogroms. Underground railroad maps in 19th century America used coded symbols. A dotted line might mean safe house to freedom seekers but appear as a creek bed to slave catchers. Even today, OpenStreetMap volunteers deliberately fudge the locations of women's shelters in conflict zones, balancing accuracy against safety. The rise of digital mapping has amplified these dilemmas exponentially. When Apple Maps displays a fake hill in a Scottish forest to trap copyright infringers, it's a quirky corporate tactic. But when authoritarian regimes manipulate GPS data to create phantom borders around disputed territories, the consequences ripple through geopolitics. The same satellite technology that helps monitor deforestation can also target indigenous activists. Every zoom level and algorithmic decision carries ethical weight. Yet unlike medieval guilds, today's tech giants rarely publish their cartographic commandments. Perhaps the most unsettling question isn't whether maps should lie, but who gets to decide. For centuries, that power belonged to kings and generals. Now it's wielded by algorithm engineers and corporate boards, entities even less accountable than Ottoman sultans burning inconvenient charts. The solution may lie in embracing maps not as singular truths, but as living conversations. Inuit communities in Canada now overlay traditional seal hunting routes onto government nautical charts, creating hybrid documents that honor both scientific and ancestral knowledge. In Colombia, campesinos armed with GPS devices are remapping lands stolen during the Civil War, pixel by pixel reclaiming erased histories. The compass of cartographic ethics still points in two directions, one toward perfect, unflinching accuracy, the other toward maps that serve justice over objectivity. Navigating between them requires recognizing that every map is ultimately a mirror, not of the world as it is, but of what its makers value enough to include. And that may be the most important truth any map can reveal. The future of lost maps may not lie in dusty archives or forgotten vaults, but in beams of ultraviolet light and neural networks trained to see the invisible. Across the world, researchers are deploying technologies that would seem like sorcery to the cartographers of old, tools that can peer beneath centuries of grime, faded ink, and even deliberate erasures. At Stanford University, a technique called multispectral imaging has resurrected ghostly coastlines on a 13th century Portolan chart, revealing trade routes somebody tried to scrub away with pumice stone. The hidden lines match descriptions from a Venetian merchant's diary, proving the map had been altered to conceal a secret path to Black Sea grain markets. Meanwhile, in Oxford's Bodleian Library, artificial intelligence is stitching together fragments of the legendary Atlas of the Four Corners, a sprawling Islamic world map mentioned in medieval texts but long presumed lost. By cross-referencing thousands of manuscript snippets with known geographic coordinates, the algorithm has already identified 17 scattered pieces as likely matches, including a fragment showing the Nile's tributaries with precision that defies its 15th century origin. Some of the most exciting breakthroughs come from the unlikeliest places. In a monastery in Thessaloniki, conservators using a modified medical MRI scanner discovered that a badly charred prayer book contained a palimpsest, a reused parchment with older writing beneath. The scorched pages, it turned out, held fragments of a 5th century Roman road map called the Tabula Peutingeriana, including lost sections that detailed alternate routes to Byzantium. Even more astonishing was what they found in the margins, annotations in a previously unknown dialect of Vulgar Latin, peppered with Greek and Illyrian loanwords, a linguistic snapshot of a multicultural empire that official records never captured. This isn't just about recovering geography, it's about retrieving voices silenced by time. The real game changer, though, may be quantum imaging. A team at the University of Chicago has developed a photon-sensitive camera capable of detecting individual particles of iron gall ink, the same corrosive mixture that ate through countless medieval maps from within. By scanning at the subatomic level, they've decoded layers of text invisible to conventional methods, including a 12th century Genos sea chart with encrypted annotations about Atlantic currents. The handwriting matches that of a notorious pirate-turned-cartographer named Enrico Pescata, whose phantom maps were said to lure ships onto reefs. But the real revelation came when researchers noticed faint lines extending west of the Azores lines that aligned perfectly with Norse sagas describing Vinland. If verified, this could mean the Genos knew of North America generations before Columbus and chose to bury the knowledge. Yet for all our technological prowess, the greatest discoveries may still depend on old-fashioned human intuition. In 2022, a graduate student in Istanbul noticed peculiar water stains on a blank section of an Ottoman tax register. Curious, she held it up to a window and saw the outline of a fortress emerge, a clandestine military map drawn on the reverse side, then deliberately bleached. Further analysis revealed it was part of a network of such maps, each showing a different section of the Danube's defenses during Suleiman the Magnificent's campaigns. Like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle scattered across continents, these reclaimed fragments are rewriting our understanding of Ottoman military strategy. The hunt for lost maps has entered uncharted territory, where AI deciphers palimpsests and quantum sensors resurrect burned documents. But the most tantalizing prospect isn't just recovering what we've lost, it's confronting how much was never recorded at all. Indigenous Australian songlines, Polynesian stick charts, Inca quipu maps, these were living geographies, transmitted through memory and ritual. Can technology ever reconstruct knowledge that was never written down? Projects like the Living Archive of Aboriginal Languages are attempting just that, using machine learning to analyze oral histories for geographic clues. Early results suggest that certain ancestral songs contain navigational data accurate to within meters when cross-referenced with satellite imagery. We stand at the edge of a cartographic renaissance where the past isn't fixed but fluid, a puzzle where new pieces surface daily. Every rediscovered line, every deciphered annotation forces us to reconsider what we thought we knew. The irony is delicious. In our digital age, we're using the tools of the future to finally listen to whispers from the past. And somewhere in those whispers, between the lines of ink and vellum, lies the thrilling possibility that the greatest maps of all might still be waiting to speak. The secret cartographers of the ancient world didn't just chart coastlines and trade routes, they wielded the ultimate power, the ability to define reality itself. Every stroke of their pens was a declaration of who mattered, who belonged, and who could be erased with the flick of a wrist. Consider the case of the Chenghe map, a 14th century Korean masterpiece that stretched from Africa to the Mediterranean with breathtaking accuracy, yet reduced the entire Indian subcontinent to a tiny, misshapen blob. This wasn't an error, it was a statement. By diminishing lands beyond their sphere of influence, Korean cartographers reinforced their kingdom's worldview, where centrality equaled supremacy. But the most haunting absences on ancient maps aren't the distortions, they're the silences. When Spanish conquistadors burned Maya codices, they weren't just destroying bark paper scrolls, they were annihilating an entire civilization's understanding of time, space, and cosmic order. Those maps didn't just show roads, they wove together constellations and harvest cycles, sacred caves, and royal genealogies. Their loss left a void no modern satellite can fill. Similarly, the empty spaces on British colonial maps of Australia labelled Terra Nullius weren't neutral omissions. They were active denials of 60,000 years of Aboriginal songlines, those intricate mental maps that tied every waterhole and mountain to creation stories. The fragility of these documents forces us to confront a painful paradox. The more powerful a map, the more vulnerable it becomes. The Library of Alexandria's Master Atlas, the Zheng He navigation charts, the Ottoman Haritasila's battle plans, all were destroyed not by accident but by design. Because controlling knowledge has always been the surest path to controlling people, when the Ming Dynasty burned its treasure fleet's records, it wasn't just hiding geography, it was rewriting China's destiny, locking away the key to maritime dominance for centuries. Yet even in their absence, these lost maps shape our present. Modern borders in Africa and the Middle East still follow the arbitrary lines drawn by European colonial cartographers, their pens slicing through ethnic territories with no more thought than a butcher dividing meat. The Piri Reis map's Phantom Antarctica continues to fuel debates about prehistoric civilizations, while the Walled Seamooler map's accidental christening of America echoes in every classroom globe. These weren't just tools, they were time capsules, carrying the biases and ambitions of their makers into futures they could never have imagined. What makes their legacy so unsettling is how little has changed. Today's digital maps, with their algorithmic biases and corporate censorship, are just the latest iteration of an ancient game. When Google Maps omits Palestinian villages or TikTok's geotags obscure her cultural sites, they're following a playbook written on Babylonian clay tablets. The powerful will always redraw the world to suit their needs. But there's hope in the fragments. Every time a scholar deciphers a Roman palimpsest or a fisherman shares oral histories that correct colonial charts, we reclaim a piece of stolen truth. The discovery of Timbuktu's hidden manuscripts proves memory can outlast fire, and the quantum imaging of charred Ottoman scrolls shows not even time can erase everything. The story of these lost maps isn't just about what's gone, it's about what survives against all odds, whispering to us across the centuries. So the next time you unfold a map, whether it's on your phone or an antique parchment, pause for a moment. Remember that you're not just holding directions, you're holding a battlefield, a confession, a dream. And somewhere beneath the surface, in the margins and the blank spaces, the ghosts of the secret cartographers are still drawing their lines, waiting for us to finally see them.